So, markers in the dog training context. What the hell are markers? Why are they important? So, over here, I'm going to explain to you what markers are. But first, let me tell you why they're important. They're important because they're an integral part of clear communication with your dog. So, clear communication reduces conflict. And clear communication is one key component of building a strong, robust, trusting relationship with your dog. So markers are super, super important. When it comes to markers, there's a pretty good rule of thumb. Any dog trainer who is half decent as a dog trainer uses markers. Just because someone uses markers doesn't make them a good dog trainer. Every high-level dog trainer in the disciplines where, say, dogs are working for humans, I'm not talking about something like herding where they're working but essentially autonomously with a little bit of input. But if you start looking at obedience type stuff, nose work, law enforcement type duties, military type stuff, everyone who does a good job of producing those dogs at the highest level is great at using markers and puts a lot of work into making sure that their markers mean to their dog what they as a trainer intend that cue to mean. I'll just use the word cue in place of marker, but just so that there's no confusion, understand that they are the same thing. A marker is a cue. So, now, you're going to hear me talk first off about using a clicker. You could use, if you have a deaf dog, you could use a flashlight as a marker. You could do that. You could click fingers. You could do this. Within the realms of practicality, you have a wide choice of what you can use as markers. I use a clicker, and for me, a clicker is indicative of the dog getting fed. So, my clicker is a reliable predictor. Every time I click, the dog gets paid. Now, there may be some of you out there who are quite advanced at dog training. There are some times we make exceptions to that for good reason, but for the vast majority of people and the vast majority of pet dog owners, that's not going to happen. People struggle with making sure that they pay reliably, and so I'm going to leave you with that advice. Every time the stimulus occurs, the outcome should follow. Now, this click, the same as any word that we say, the same as any sound that we make, has no... the dog is not born knowing what these are. We have to teach him. Okay, and we do this through a process of association. Now, if you've heard of Pavlov's dog, where the dog heard a cue and then salivated because it was expecting food, that this is Pavlovian conditioning, also known as classical conditioning. Don't get all bent up over it. They're both the same thing. So, we're taking a stimulus and we're pairing it with an outcome. And ideally, this, from the moment that that sound is made, I want to create the outcome within half a second. Now, you can take a bit longer than that, but that's the ideal, and that's what I encourage you to aim for in the start. As things get along, your marker in certain contexts can become a bit more of a promissory note, and it can buy you a little time between the marker and providing the outcome. But particularly when you first start working, try and keep this gap in here very low. Anything past 3 seconds, I'll be really surprised if your dog picks it up. It's not going to be very efficient, and I really think you're stretching it at 3 seconds. Now, I'm talking about a click equaling food. That's an appetitive outcome, meaning it's enjoyable for the dog. But equally, I could create a marker with an aversive association, so an unenjoyable association. And in that example, it could be that I say no, and I'll give you a real world example. So, this didn't actually happen, but in this example, I'm feeding Boogie a metre away from Snap. And Boogie's a fast eater, and he's faster than Snap. And so I have him on a leash, and he finishes his meal, and he decides to go and stick his head in Snap's food bowl. I mark him with a no. That's the stimulus. And then straight away, I restrict his movement on the leash, I take him away, and I lock him in the laundry for 10 minutes. So I'm removing him from what he wanted, and I'm putting him in isolation as punishment, right? So that's where I've made the word no, where I've paired the word no with an aversive outcome. When you're using your cues, you never want your cue to mean something good one day and something bad the next day. That's a major problem. So that's the most basic part of understanding what these cues are. Now, what I will say is, to have really, really strong markers, we are talking about thousands of events, right? Now, you will see dogs do quite well after 50 or 100, but really, really, really robust markers will have thousands of events attached to them. It's a game of repetition, guys. So here's the next part of what we're going to talk about, which is worth a consideration in setting up your own system of markers with your dog. So, whether by design or whether due to the nature of the outcome, we can have terminal or non-terminal markers. Now, I'll give you an example of what this means. So, terminal means that it finishes the skill or the repetition, whichever word's going to be a better fit for what you're thinking of in your head. But it means that things are finished. Now, if I have an example of my dog and my great artwork here, there's my dog, and he's sitting. And so then, if I want an example of a non-terminal marker, I click, and then I deliver the food to my dog whilst he is still sitting, and he understands that the click does not finish his sit. Now, if I was, and that's how Boogie is set up, okay? Now, let's say that I use the word break. Well, break is a terminal cue. Break means skill complete. For me, it means skill complete, job done. Now engage with me to get a really high-end reward. So the nature of the outcome for Boogie is it's either a ball or a tug. And so he can't meaningfully engage with either of those items without finishing what he was doing. So we'll call that a terminal cue or a terminal marker. Okay? Both of these, both the click and the break, are reinforcing events, but due to the nature of the outcome and also by my design, that's how I use them differently. So, hopefully that helps clear up any confusion that you have about what markers are. Markers are reliable predictors of events, of outcomes. Those outcomes can be good or they can be bad. Most of the time, most of the cues that you're going to see skilled dog trainers using are going to be appetitive markers because they're interested in building robust performances. But that's another topic for another day. I'm going to leave it there. I hope this has been useful to some of you in some way.